Now, I know a lot of Uber drivers and Lyft drivers don't really care about the Uber stock price and the Lyft stock price, but you should. This is a huge issue because a lot of times I like to go on Google News and just read what's going on in the ride-sharing world. I'll just search Uber, Lyft, whatever. For example, I did a video recently talking about how in Chicago, they're putting in a policy in place that's being put forth. Well, let's say if you get deactivated wrongly, Uber and Lyft may have to give you kind of a reimbursement or something along those lines. Basically, it makes it harder for these companies to just randomly deactivate you, which is important. That's a huge issue when it comes to deactivation. However, and this is what's really tricky when it comes to all these news articles and everything going on, is the Uber stock price and the Lyft stock price. When looking on the news section, when I searched Uber, all I saw were positive articles. Uber's doing great. Huge revenue in quarter one. They're reporting amazing earnings, etc., etc. Things are looking amazing for Uber. But when it comes to Lyft, the exact opposite. Even just searching Lyft, not even the Lyft stock price or anything, just searching Lyft, all I saw were articles talking about how bad Lyft is doing, and even some of them talking about how Uber is now taking over Lyft, or Uber's doing great, Lyft isn't. Now, the reason why I think this is so important, and I have mentioned this again on a few different videos actually, is I'm really worried about one of the ride-sharing companies taking over. I think that in a very unique way, there does need to be a yin and yang of having both Uber and Lyft. I think it's super important to have both in the ecosystem that is ride-sharing. It's super useful for drivers, and I might even say passengers as well. Like, let's be honest, if you're driving on a Friday or Saturday night, you're looking to make the most amount of money. If Uber's having bonuses, great, you drive for Uber. If, let's say, they're not, but Lyft is having bonuses, boom, you drive for Lyft. This, I think, is very imperative for the ride-sharing landscape, I think, especially monetarily as well, right? The biggest thing that we don't want is a huge monopoly. If, let's say, you go to drive, and let's say there's only one. Let's say it's Uber or Lyft or whatever. Let's say there's only one, and they're saying, hey, we're going to pay you $10 an hour. You don't have the ability to pull up another app and say, oh, well, this one's paying $15 an hour, for example. Let's say as a passenger, if I'm taking an Uber or Lyft, and let's say there's a huge surge with Uber, and they're charging me $30 for a ride when it's usually a lot cheaper, but I have no other option for a ride-sharing company, I'm pretty much stuck with that, and that can cause a lot of issues. And bringing that back to the Uber stock price and Lyft stock price, it seems over time, with Uber and Lyft, they're pretty equal. I mean, I think Uber's always been a slight bit on top, but not too much. However, as time has gone on, it's definitely apparent that Uber is like here and slowly increasing as Lyft is also decreasing. It's almost this huge kind of swing where Uber is continuing to increase and Lyft is not just staying the same. They're completely going on polar opposites and moving on the complete ends of the spectrum when it comes to their stock price, their revenue, their losses, et cetera, et cetera. Uber's getting better, Lyft is getting worse. And this is something I'm very, very worried about. I've mentioned this in, again, a bunch of other videos because this could be a huge problem for a lot of rideshare drivers. Let me know what you think in the comments, especially when I do talk to a lot of drivers. It seems like that overall, Lyft tends to be the more favorable app. I remember reading about a survey and a study that they found that a lot of drivers said, look, I prefer Lyft. I prefer taking Lyfts and driving for Lyft. I just feel like they're a better company, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I feel like there is a bit of a hidden variable on that. I will say, in case you didn't know, and probably not surprising, Uber is massively bigger than Lyft, right? They're getting massive, not only in terms of right here in America, but just internationally in terms of different countries. Uber is spreading to a lot of countries. So it makes sense. If you have more drivers on the road, it makes sense there's going to be just naturally a lot more negative perspectives than, like, say, if you don't, right? I think this is true for, like say, an Amazon review of a product. If, like, say, you have a product that has 100 reviews versus 1,000, there tends to be more negative reviews out of that 1,000, not because maybe necessarily it's a bad product, but just because, as you can imagine, the more people that use it, the more people that, statistically speaking, are not going to like it, et cetera, et cetera. So I will say that when it comes to Uber and Lyft, but the issue is, as Uber continues to get bigger, and I've mentioned all the crazy things Uber's doing. You're talking about Uber parking, which you can rent a parking spot, Uber Explore to rent, to get, like, say, a hotel if you want to. If you actually want to get a concert ticket, if you want to book something in a restaurant. You have Uber Eats, of course. And of course, Uber just took over Postmates as well. You have Uber Charter, where you can rent a party bus. You have Uber Rental, where you can rent a car as opposed to going to, like, say, Hertz or something like that. There's so many different options Uber's now doing. And I have mentioned that I look at Uber now very similar to Amazon, that although Amazon started as a bookstore, or I guess an online used bookstore or whatever, Amazon now sells everything. So it's not a bookstore, even though it started at that. It's kind of like an online store, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, to oversimplify it. And with Uber, although Uber started as a rideshare company, I really do look at them as an on-demand service company. You want food? Boom, right there. You want concert tickets? Boom, right there. You want to get a ride from point A to point B? Boom, you have that option right then and there. With Lyft, it's just ride sharing. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying, we have this one particular thing that we specialize in, and we don't really care about exploring other options, so to speak. However, with the revenue of Lyft going down so much, and with the revenue of Uber going up so much, especially with the stock prices, this is massive. Because although on one end, I know a lot of drivers, like I said in the beginning of this video, might be like, well, Mark, I don't really care as much, right? Like, I'm not investing in Uber, I'm not investing in Lyft. But if the Lyft stock prices fall so much that a lot of investors say, you know what, maybe this company is not as profitable as we thought. And a lot more investors start to kind of pull out of Lyft saying, it's just not for us. That's going to have a huge ripple effect for you as a driver. It could be very possible this year. I don't know. Next year, I'm not sure. It's not unlikely to say that Uber might potentially buy Lyft. 3 to 5 years ago, even with the pandemic, not saying it was impossible, but I looked at it as being very highly unlikely. I was like, you know what? You have both companies. Both companies are doing great for the most part. I think it'll be fine. Not the case anymore. It is not that unlikely at all now. And if anything, if I had to like flip a coin and say, okay, am I going to think, or not flip a coin, but if I had to guess, do I think Uber or Lyft is going to come out on top? I would say Uber, of course. And it's not unlikely, in my opinion, that if I had to give like a percentage, I'm now leaning more towards the fact that I'm almost expecting at some point to read an article, see a headline, whatever, saying Uber has just bought Lyft. And at that point, I think that's where things get very, very tricky. What will happen if that happens? Maybe I can do an entire video about this, but does that mean Uber, which is very likely, just keeps Lyft around? They say, you know what? We're just going to keep Lyft around because we'll have both. We get the revenue from both, kind of how Uber Eats did this with Postmates, right? They bought Postmates, and they're like, okay, so we're going to have both Uber Eats and Postmates existing simultaneously, no big deal. On the other end, you could look at what Twitter did with Vine, where they bought Vine and just got rid of it. And so you have no idea what's going to happen. No one really does, of course. But just overall, I think that with the stock prices being very indicative of what investors want to do, and especially what investors do equals more money or cash flow into each company. If Uber continues to increase and Lyft continues to decrease as they're doing, it could be very, very likely. And the more videos I do about this, the more I'm worried. It's very, very likely, if not now more probable and possible, that Uber could take over Lyft this year.